When most people hear the name Henry Ford, they think of the Model T, the moving assembly line, and the birth of modern automobile manufacturing. But during World War I, Ford turned his attention to something very different, building one of America's first domestically designed tanks. By 1917, the First World War had transformed warfare forever. British and French tanks were proving that armored vehicles could break through the trenches, cross rough terrain, and support infantry in ways that had never been possible before. The United States, having only recently entered the war, quickly realized it needed tanks of its own. At the time, however, America had almost no experience designing or manufacturing armored fighting vehicles. Rather than starting completely from scratch, the U.S. Army looked to one of the nation's greatest industrial innovators, Henry Ford. Ford had already revolutionized manufacturing through standardized parts and assembly line production. His factories were producing automobiles at unprecedented speeds, and military planners believed those same methods could be used to build thousands of tanks for the war effort. Instead of creating a handful of expensive prototypes, Ford's philosophy was simple: design something practical, reliable, and easy to produce in enormous numbers. The project that emerged became known as the Special Tractor M1918, though history remembers it simply as the Ford 3-ton tank. Rather than copying existing European designs outright, Ford's engineers borrowed ideas from the successful French Renault FT, one of the world's first modern tanks. Like the Renault, the Ford 3-ton placed its engine in the rear and featured a compact layout. However, Ford simplified the design considerably. Instead of using a rotating turret, the vehicle mounted its machine gun directly into the hull. This reduced complexity, lowered manufacturing costs, and made production faster. The tank itself weighed only about 3 tons, making it significantly lighter than many of the massive British heavy tanks fighting on the Western Front. The real innovation, though, came from under the armor. Ford saw no reason to invent an entirely new engine when his company already produced one of the most reliable engines in America. Rather than designing a specialized power plant, engineers installed 2 Ford Model T engines side by side. Each engine drove its own track through a separate transmission, effectively giving the tank 2 complete drivetrains working together. Combined, they produced roughly 32 to 35 horsepower, allowing the little tank to reach speeds of up to 8 miles an hour. This unusual dual-engine arrangement also gave the tank impressive maneuverability for its era. By operating each transmission independently, the driver could vary the speed of each track, making turns tighter than many contemporary vehicles. It was an innovative solution, although it also made driving incredibly complicated. Instead of controlling a single engine and gearbox, the driver had to manage 2 transmissions, 2 steering levers, 2 brake pedals, and a shared accelerator. Coordinating all of these controls required considerable skill, making the Ford 3-ton far more difficult to operate than its simple appearance suggested. Despite these quirks, the U.S. Army saw enormous potential. Military planners envisioned Ford's factories producing tanks almost as quickly as automobiles. Initial plans called for an incredible 15,000 Ford 3-ton tanks, a number that reflected the Army's confidence not only in the design, but in Henry Ford's unmatched manufacturing capability. If production had reached those numbers, it would have represented one of the largest armored vehicle manufacturing programs attempted during World War I. But history had other plans. As production finally began in late 1918, the war was already drawing to a close. On November 11th, 1918, Germany signed the armistice, ending the fighting on the Western Front. Overnight, the urgent need for thousands of new tanks disappeared. The massive production contract was canceled after only 15 tanks had been completed. A handful of vehicles were sent to France for evaluation, where Allied observers compared them against existing designs. Although the Ford 3-ton was inexpensive and relatively easy to manufacture, its lack of a rotating turret and cramped 2-man interior limited its combat effectiveness. Tank design was evolving rapidly, and by the time the Ford vehicle was ready, newer concepts had already begun to surpass it. As a result, the Ford 3-ton never entered meaningful combat service, yet its historical importance shouldn't be overlooked. The Ford 3-ton represented one of America's earliest attempts to combine industrial mass production with armored warfare. It demonstrated that automobile manufacturing techniques could be adapted to military vehicles, an idea that would become critically important during the Second World War. Today, only 2 surviving Ford 3-ton tanks remain. One is preserved at Fort Benning, Georgia, while the other is housed in the U.S. Army Ordnance Collection at Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia. They stand as rare reminders of an ambitious project that arrived just a little too late. The Ford 3-ton may never have changed the outcome of World War I, but it marked the beginning of America's journey into tank design.